Hello, everybody that is listening or watching. This is Ask the Pastor with J.D. Greear. I am Matt Love. And this week, we are continuing on with this series we've been going through, a Gospel and Politics series. As we're getting into, more and more intense political season, we just feel like these sorts of conversations and questions and topics are going to be really helpful. And so Pastor J.D. has been doing these interviews with different people, and we've been playing those on this feed. These are just great conversations. And so this week we have a special guest, Jason Thacker. Jason Thacker serves as an assistant professor of philosophy and ethics at Boyce College and Southern Seminary, which is in Louisville, Kentucky. He is also a senior fellow in bioethics and director of the Research Institute at the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention. It's an impressive resume, which you see me glancing down. It's because I'm trying to get all this amazing stuff that this guy has done. And he's also the author of several books, including Following Jesus in the Digital Age and the Age of AI, Artificial Intelligence, and the Future of Humanity. So this is going to be a great conversation, and let's go ahead and hop in as Pastor J.D. interviews Jason in a conversation focusing on the topic of AI.
Jason, I'm very intrigued. In fact, this is one of the hottest topics right now. When I'm asked random questions by people somewhere, this is one I'm getting all the time on this subject here. So thank you for joining me, and thank you for doing this here for us at the Summit Church.
Yeah, thank you for having me, JD. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Well, let's just start with a really basic question, and that is, what is artificial intelligence? I mean, most people, is this like some kind of hopped up Alexa and Siri? Is it Chat GPT? Is it a kind of a shorter access to Google search, where you can get more specific? Or what exactly is it? How would you define it?
Yeah, AI, it's really funny because that conversation up until about a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, most people had kind of two reactions. Like AI is this kind of far off future phenomenon, kind of when the robots rise up and take over. Or we had this idea that, AI is it's something that we use, but we don't use it a lot. It's not really ubiquitous in our society. It's not something we need to really care about or think about. But recently, with the release of ChatGPT and other generative AI systems, this is all anybody wants to talk about, because we see the ways that these tools are already and have long been transforming our entire society, from our homes to our offices to even our churches, and thinking about the nature of manufacturing or the nature of government, the nature of banking, and all of these different ways. AI is everywhere. We're using it whether we realize it or not. Simply put, it's just the ability of a machine to perform a human-like task. And what I mean by that is the ability of a machine to make a complex decision, to write a piece of prose, to create an artwork or a piece of art, or to create a video or audio, or even to change the temperature on my thermostat, or to turn my lights on and off, depending on. Now, we have very simple algorithms, and we have really complex ones. But reality is it's undergirding every single aspect of our society, from the things we see online and shopping to our Netflix queue and the things that we see up next or might be recommended for us. There's an algorithm or an AI system driving much of those decisions that makes our life a lot more convenient and easy. But I think most of us are kind of waking up to the realization that AI is not only everywhere, but it's radically altering our society. And that's one of the reasons that years ago we wanted to get ahead of the game and to equip the church to think biblically about these tools. Because one of the conversations that comes up a lot is, well, what if these tools kind of overtake humanity, or what if they outperform us? And as Christians, we have a worldview that's rooted in who God is, how he created us in his very image, and the fact that we can't create something like God can create. And we can obviously unpack some of that, but I think that gives Christians a hope, but also an expectation when we step into these conversations to do so rooted in the biblical revelation and the nature of who God made us and who he is as our creator.
Well, let me ask a question related to that. And that is, I think it's anybody, whether they're in the church or not, that has this question about, is Terminator 2 actually going to happen and these things rise up? But are your concerns about AI more less, maybe concerned about that, but are it more about just what it's going to do to the nature of our faith and how we see the world and how we see ourselves? Is that your bigger concern?
I do think so, in large part. So one of the things that I think is helpful in this conversation to kind of frame it up is a lot of the dreams of kind of robots taking over, kind of Armageddon, iRobot scenarios, a lot of the Hollywood thriller kind of plot movie scripts that we see. That's something called like a general level of intelligence or something like a super intelligence. Reality is philosophers, ethicists, theologians alike, no matter their faith or non-faith, many debate that if that's even possible. We're not even sure we can accomplish something like a human level intelligence, which is a general intelligence, meaning that my 5-year-old son has more capability than even the most advanced AI machines, broadly speaking, generally speaking. But an AI does already outperform him and even me and even you in very particular tasks. And so we have this idea of narrow AI and something called broad or general AI. Mm-hmm. Reality is the general intelligence, we're the only general intelligent being in the whole universe, humanity. That's something that makes us unique and distinct, to set apart from the rest of creation. This idea of a super intelligence is even further off. It's like a godlike status. Reminds me of Exodus 32 and the golden calf, something we can create that we bow down and worship, that has power over us, that theme of idolatry that we see throughout the scriptures. But what we're talking about today, when we're talking about AI, we're talking about narrow AI. And I am very concerned about it, not just because of the Terminator type of kind of futuristic kind of plots, but more so the way that technology, whether it's AI, whether it's social media or whatever, is shaping our world. It's shaping our perception of God. It shapes our perception of ourselves, which I think is the big question with AI. And also the way we view the world around us. It's shaping how we engage other people. We see this from social media and trolls and tribes online, to the ways that we see this kind of commodification happening throughout our society, where we treat people as just a means to an end. What's happening and how is technology shaping and forming us? It's not just a neutral tool that we use. It's not something we can just use for good or for evil, but maybe it's actually shaping and forming us in very subtle but very distinct ways. And one of the things that I argue in my Following Jesus in a Digital Age book is that we need to slow down, ask the right questions, and to understand that these technologies aren't just good or bad, but they're also not neutral. They're shaping and forming us. And part of conjuring up and part of living out that idea of gospel wisdom, Christian wisdom, is to slow down, ask the right questions, and understand what these tools are, how they're forming and shaping us, so that we get to the root of the problem, rather than just addressing a lot of the symptoms that we see today.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know if this is an official classification, and you can certainly correct me on this, but it seems like when I hear believers at least talk about AI, it's almost like there's 3 buckets of danger. The one bucket is, let's just call it the Terminator. We create something that ultimately destroys us, like a nuclear bomb, or just something that would undermine humanity. The second one is more the Tower of Babel scenario, and that is it not that there's anything inherently wrong with it? It's just that it's so. There was something about the Tower of Babel and what was going on there that God said that will lead to such diabolical wickedness. That's, it's a power that humans just weren't meant to have. And then the third scenario is a little bit what I think you were alluding to, where it's that AI will have the ability to capitalize on our sinful impulses and market, monetize them, because my sinful impulse ends up, causing me to buy your product more, or whatever it is, whether it's through envy or lust or whatever that is. And so, those are the 3, kind of that I hear. And my question is a little bit 2-part. Are there other dangers we should be aware of? And then, this is the second part of the question. What are there worldview assumptions behind this that we, just need to be aware of as we go into the conversation? Because, I think we all realize, like it or not, it's here. Like it or not, it is here to stay.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a lot to unpack there. I think one of the big statements, I make this in the Age of AI book. I think one of the most ironic kind of aspects of today's culture, especially surrounding AI, is that we're creating machines that we seek to humanize. We give them faces, we give them names, we even embody them in terms of robotics. We wonder if these machines are ever going to wake up and gain kind of sentience or intelligence and be like us. So it's interesting because we seek to humanize this creation that we've made. In the same respect, kind of the flip side of that is we're actually dehumanizing ourselves. We're seeing ourselves, kind of that worldview implication aspect of your question is that one of the predominant kind of understandings of what it means to be human is just kind of this materialistic reality. There's nothing unique. There's nothing special about you, whether it's a product of evolution, the Big Bang, or whatever. There's no God. God is not just no longer dead. He just never really existed in that sense. That who we are gods unto ourselves. We are our own kind of creators, that there's nothing unique or special about us. And that kind of set apart nature obviously has massive worldview implications when we think about the nature of the Christian worldview. We read in very, very quickly in Genesis 1 that God created the heavens and the earth. He's God, we're not. He's infinite, we are finite. But then he made us in his very image and set us apart from the rest of creation, made us unique and different because of that image, because of because of who he made us to be. And that has set us apart from the rest of creation. So it's interesting because when we take on these godlike status, these godlike abilities to think that we can create like God can create, that's where things I think start to get awry. One of the big questions that I think is really pressing in this age of AI is that question of what does it mean to be human? Now, we're used to hearing that question, especially in terms of sexuality or gender issues, in terms of pro-life issues, in terms of a host of kind of social and ethical issues. I do think that this idea of what does it mean to be human is the predominant question of our day. It's also one of the predominant questions in this age of AI as well, because we look at these machines and we see something almost of ourselves in them. We see something we've long assumed what it meant to be human was that we were smart. We were rationing creatures. We were reasoning creatures. That's what made us unique and made us special. But when we look at these machines, not only doing things that we once did, but maybe even doing them better than we did, we can start to assume that what does it mean to be human is based on the things I do rather than who I am. That sense of my utility, my worth, my value, my dignity is rooted in the things I do, the things I contribute, the things I produce, rather than who I am as a creature of God. It's not based on my abilities. It's based on who God has made me to be. And that's unalterable. That's unchanging. That's one of the reasons that this concept of the image of God or the imago Dei is so central to Christian ethics, because it says your value, your dignity, your worth is not based on what you do. It's based on who you are and who you've been created to be. And so we have that inherent dignity, but we also have that purpose, that design to become more like Christ, who is the true image of God. So when we start to think about these concepts of AI, a lot of the fears, I think often a lot of them, especially recently, because we look at these machines and we go, wow, these things are doing things that we thought were uniquely human. And these machines are performing them, and they're just getting better and better and better. So not only do we start to seek to humanize these machines, but we dehumanize ourselves and see ourselves as less than because we don't contribute, we don't do as much, we don't have as much utility maybe as one of these machines. But that's to really kind of flip the Christian worldview on its head. And we kind of have to reorient ourselves to remember who God is, how he made us in his very image, and how he then calls us to live in a world that is ever changing, but it's a God who never changes.
Yeah. So 3 terms that we've used so far, and I want to see if there's any distinction in these terms or if they're overlapping. General intelligence, consciousness, and then image of God. Yeah. Are those 3 kind of interchangeable terms? Do they overlap? How would you differentiate?
Yeah, I don't think that they are interchangeable. And one of the reasons that I don't think that, I mean, historically, when the church has looked at this idea of what is the image of God, this is a really important question that I encourage listeners and to slow down. When we engage these kind of big terms like technology or social media or the image of God or theology, to ask, what are we talking about? Just to make sure we're on the same page. Throughout church history, there's been long debate on what is the image of God. Is it a capacity that we have for reason, rationality? Is it something, a relational capacity? Is it something, our ability that we function like God, that we have certain jobs and abilities like God to represent him? And all of these things are true in many ways. We see them throughout the scripture. But one of the interesting things that we see very clearly throughout the scripture too is it's not the attributes or these properties that we say that's what it means to be human. human. It's that a human is manifesting those. And so it's coming back to this status. So that's one of the reasons when I think about the image of God, I don't want to say it's this rational capacity. I don't want to say that it's just consciousness, that it's some part of us. And that's what makes us distinctly human, is that we don't look to what is around the world to describe what does it mean to be human. We compare ourselves to God because we're created in the image of God. We're made like God, that we're set apart, distinct from the rest of creation. In terms of that idea of consciousness, awareness, rationality, reason, a lot of those are attributes. Those are capacities that we have. And that we model and kind of manifest in varying degrees, actually, which is kind of interesting, from the child in the womb to the person on their deathbed at the very end of their life. They may not be contributing as much. They may not have the same level of rationality or reason. They may not be able to function or even have that kind of relationality that we have as human beings. Meaning that it can't be just the presence of that property or that attribute that makes us human, because we experience that in various degrees. That comes back to that idea of the status. So that idea of consciousness, where does consciousness lie? Obviously, that God understands that better than we do. This is a long question within philosophy that has been long debated by many, many people smarter than both of us. And they may not even come to a conclusion on exactly what that means, but that self-awareness, that idea, there is something uniquely human about that. But again, it's not just the mere presence of those capacities. It's not just those abilities that define who we are as image bearers. It's that status that God has bestowed on us, that he's made us in his very image. Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, male and female, he created them. There's something unique, this type that God set us apart from the rest of creation, and that he's endowed with certain capacities and attributes, but it's not the attributes or the capacities that we say are human. It's actually the status that's manifesting those things.
So I hear a nuance in there, and tell me if I am articulating it correctly, or see if I totally botch it up. Consciousness seems to be something unique to humans that flows out of the image of God. However, there is some mystery in it. And when it comes to things like artificial intelligence, there might be, to varying degrees, things that maybe you could say mimic consciousness, self-reflection, things that would look like that. And that wouldn't necessarily be a theological problem for you, because ultimately us being in the image of God is not because we, have this set of reasoning or consciousness abilities. That's just more a fruit of it right now. Is that in the ballpark of what you're saying?
Yes and no. So I think I would articulate it to say that, yes, I think there is something uniquely human about being conscious. One of the things that's really interesting when you talk to computer scientists who are actually building these systems, they realize and will very quickly tell you these systems have no idea what they're doing. They have no concept of meaning. They have no concept of truth or reality in that sense. It's a really grand kind of calculator, to put it in the most simple terms. It's making a calculation based on the probability, based on these data and inputs, to make it that this would be the right decision. Now, it could be right. It could be wrong. More often than not, it's becoming more and more right. Reality is, though, it has no idea what it's doing. It's not aware. It's not conscious. So I think there are Christians who will fall on both sides of this debate. And I would like to just say is, yes, I do think that humans are uniquely made by God, that we are self-aware, that we are conscious. But just because we're self-aware doesn't mean that that's what makes us human per se. I think we even see in animals, we see some type of awareness, self-awareness, maybe not to the level or the extent of most human beings, but it comes down to that question too of what happens when someone is unconscious? Are they somehow not human?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
So those type of questions I think are really interesting. And again, not to say that the Christian position is X and everything that falls outside of it is not, but to say within the Christian community, there can be some deviations, some understandings of what this means. But we come back to that core truth and that core reality revealed clearly in Scripture, that God has made us in his very image, set us apart. It's not based on what we do, but based on who we are. But based on who we are and how God has created us, we do manifest. We do have certain characteristics. We do have certain capacities traditionally understood in terms of reason, rationality, relational ability, even that kind of functional ability in terms of representing God and taking dominion that we see very clearly in the Scripture as well. So again, this is a much larger kind of debate within theology on what is the image of God? What does it exactly mean to be human? And I think when we apply that to conversations about AI, we don't have to be fearful of what is to come, because these things are never going to perform or outrival God. He is the creator. He is the sole creator of the universe. He is the all-knowing, omnipotent, powerful God. But he's also made us in his image. So I think when we start to step back and to realize who we are, who God is, who we are, that then naturally flows into what then will we do about these tools? How do we navigate these things? And there are some real dangers on the horizon that we need to be aware of as the church, especially as we seek to minister to a culture, to seek to bring the gospel to bear on a culture. And I think one of the ways we can do that from an apologetic standpoint is kind of reminding ourselves, but also reminding those around us that who your value, your dignity and worth is not based on what you do. It's based on who you are as a creation of God.
That's a great emphasis that I frankly don't hear a lot in this conversation. So that's incredible. Let me talk about those dangers a little bit, but let me do it by means of you ready for a little lightning round here? I'm going to ask you to give a minute to a minute and a half of counsel to, let's just say, 4 different groups. Okay. And I'll we'll go through them one at a time. What minute and a half counsel would you give to the mom or dad who's thinking, what are ways that I can take advantage of AI? What are the positives? And then what are the real dangers? Then we're going to go to, let's go to the pastor. Then let's go to the business owner. And then lastly, I want you to speak words of counsel to the government. Like if you were saying to the government, here's what you could do in this, because this is a gospel and politics series. So, what is it that we would say like, hey, these are things that we need to think about in election. So let's start with the mom or dad who's just like, what do I do with my family related to this?
Yeah, I would say one of the things is technology it's here. It's not something you can avoid forever. I think one of the big questions we always get is when's the kind of magic age to give a kid a phone, a teenager a phone or something like that. I hold off as long as possible, but in reality is you can't avoid these things forever. So the counsel to mom and dad is to say, look, there are some crazy technologies out there. Don't just hand them to your children and expect them to figure it out. Learn with them, develop that rapport and that relationship to say, instead of, hey, Tommy, here's a new VR headset, have fun, but actually maybe do that with them, learn alongside them so that you have that relationship, because your goal, your purpose as a parent is to raise them up in the way that they should go, to create a more virtuous human being, to create and to model what it means to live out the calling that God has placed on our lives. And so I think doing that with our children can actually be a really helpful tool, and to think that, look, there may be a lot of convenience and efficiency, but wisdom is actually not very convenient. It's not overly efficient, which is kind of the driving force of technology. And so slowing down to teach our children, not just the ways they should go, who God is, how he created us, how we are to live, and to model that for them, I think is a really good, big way to kind of step into this digital age, to do so with wisdom and with care of raising our children and hoping to model for them what virtue looks like, what true virtue and wisdom looks like.
Yeah, that's really good. I was thinking while you were talking about that of how Proverbs talks about wisdom, that it's a struggle. It takes time. You got to seek it like you seek gold, and that's a really good wisdom. And there's no right age or no biblical age to give your kid technology. You could probably say there's a lot of wrong ages. My wife and I signed that wait to 8th thing. So at least through 8th grade, which is not in the Bible, but man, it just seems like that's a difficult thing.
And even then, there are kids that are more mature than others. I think there are a lot of 40 and 50-year-old men and women who may not have the maturity level to have social media on their phone, much less a teenager. And so realizing that we're all in a different path of our journey, but the goal is wisdom, the goal is virtue, to become more Christ-like. So how do we kind of inculcate that in our children very early on?
Yeah, that's good. All right. Second one was the pastor. Talking to the pastor, how would you counsel them?
Again, these are questions that your people are asking. I just talked to a pastor who did an entire kind of a Sunday devoted to AI in the image of God. Now, I'm not saying that pastors need to do that, but I do want pastors to realize that your people are asking these questions. And so again, I'm not saying dedicate a whole series to technology or a whole series to AI. You may not be qualified to speak to those issues. Having some humility to say, look, I know these are issues or questions you're having. I've been reading up on this. I've been thinking about these things as well. Or even as you're preaching through a message and maybe be making some of those connections. One of the interesting things for pastors, just to remind them, not only are people asking these questions, but you very well might, and I hope you do, have people in your church who are actually building these systems, who are technologists, who are developers. How are you encouraging them on the path that God has called them to think biblically about their work, about their jobs, about what God has placed in the gifts that he's given them? And so I think thinking holistically about the way we counsel, the way we preach, and the way we teach, to say, look, we don't have to chase every kind of cultural issue in the pulpit, but to recognize that those are the realities that our people are facing as we seek to equip them with God's word to engage those ever-changing circumstances with that unchanging nature of God's word.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Third one was going to be the business owner. What would your counsel be to them?
Yeah, I would say you are getting inundated, and every business owner will know this. They're getting inundated by technology companies saying, look, we can automate this. We can make this more efficient. We can make this more convenient. You can hire, you can expand your workforce. You can do X, Y, and Z. And a lot of those things may be true. One of the dangers, though, is that we just kind of rush headlong into innovation for innovation's sake. Your goal as a business owner is cultivating and stewarding the people that God has given you for the betterment of your community. So as you think about that, yes, you do want to make money. That is a goal of business. You want to make money. You want to be profitable. But I think another goal of the Christian business owner especially is, how are you treating the people in your care with dignity? How are you honoring them, in terms of job retraining or restructuring? How are you caring for people underneath you as you seek to profit for ultimately the glory of God and the mission of God? Mm-hmm. And so I would just say, don't rush into innovation for innovation's sake. To slow down, to ask the right questions, and to remember that God has put people under your care, even if you're not in a pastoral role, even as a business owner, that he's called you to love and to care for and to respect in terms of the dignity and value in work. The goal of life is not just to have the white picket fence and the perfect little house and the perfect little nuclear family. All of those things can be good, but they also can be an idol. And so how are we actually encouraging, how are we loving, and how are we stewarding the great responsibility that God has given us as business owners to lead and to prioritize dignity, sometimes over profit, dignity over sometimes convenience and efficiency and innovation? Now, again, that doesn't mean you avoid it at all costs, but you do so with a more holistic vision of the calling that God's placed on your life as a business owner.
Yeah, it's kind of like carrying the Christian mindset into business that you would without AI, which is basically that my business is not, while profit is important, it's not solely a profit-making thing, that there are curbs I may put on myself for humanity's sake. And we all recognize that, we're injustices that we're not going to be a part of, or exploitation. And so, it's a really good word. All right, final one. You're speaking to the government. What we're speaking to us who are electing people. What is it that would be important for them to hear?
Again, we can't kind of stick our head in the sand on these things. These issues are real, they're pressing. But again, just because we can doesn't mean we should. And I think that's a question that kind of pervades all of these kind of people we've been talking to, is that question of, should we do something versus can we? That's actually the question of ethics. Should we, ought we do something? And I think that's one of the things we need to think through in the halls of government, whether it's in Congress or in the administration, is just because we can, should we? But then what are we prioritizing? Are we prioritizing national defense and safety? We should. Are we prioritizing a stronger economy? Yes, we should. Are we prioritizing our nation? I think we should in many ways. But what is ultimately driving those things? Are we having that kind of human dignity principle kind of central to everything we're doing? So yes, I do believe we need some type of government regulation, but I also want the industry itself, technology industry, the AI industry, to say, look, we have a very powerful stewardship. We have a really large responsibility before us. It's going to take an all hands on deck approach. It's not just, hey, government, get it together and regulate this, or hey, industry, get it together and fix this, but to say all of us need to be part of this conversation. One of the things I've been saying for years, and I'll continue saying, is that when we develop, whether it's governing boards or documents, or when we talking about gathering the right people together, let's make sure we actually represent all people, especially people of faith, in these conversations, because these conversations aren't just affecting us in the abstract. They're affecting all of us every single day. And I think people of faith and no faith at all actually have something valuable to bring to this conversation. It's really going to take an all hands on deck approach to navigate these things with wisdom and with care.
Yeah. Jason, this has been so helpful. I appreciate you spending this time with us. And let me recommend, in fact, I've got it right back up there on my shelf. I should have pulled it off before we started to talk. But Following Jesus in the Digital Age is one book that Jason's written. And then The Age of AI, Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Humanity. If this conversation has seemed like an appetizer to you and you're like, if you're feeling like there's so much more here to know, then you're probably feeling the right thing there. And so those resources are a great place to start. Anywhere else, Jason, you would tell them to pay attention to, whether it's your work or somebody else's, before we sign off here? Anything that you would point us to learn more about this?
Yeah, one of the things I have on my website, jasonthacker.com, I have a weekly newsletter that I kind of pull together resources from all across the web, as well as some of my own resources. I have that centralized there on my website at jasonthacker.com, as well as the Digital Public Square podcast that I host each week, interviewing leaders, thinkers, theologians, philosophers, ethicists, just saying, how do we be faithful? How do we bring the gospel to bear on all of life, including the public square? So those are some resources. There's a host of books and resources there for people to check out. So jasonthacker.com.
Excellent. Appreciate that, Jason. Thank you for spending the time with us and for equipping us to do this better.
Yeah, thanks for having me, JD.
All right, everybody. I hope that was helpful. AI is not our normal, jam, but I thought it was a great conversation. It's cool to hear Pastor J.D. process with Jason Thacker on that topic. And next week, we're going to continue this series, and Pastor J is going to interview Katie McCoy. So don't miss that. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe right now. Subscribe where you listen. Subscribe on YouTube at j.d.greear so you can watch all of these videos and all of our podcasts going forward. So we will see you next time on Ask the Pastor.